It's a real honor to represent the school in welcoming our performers to the School of Public Policy and to the atrium. And I'm still dancing from last night because I heard the whole ensemble last night, and it was certainly a high point for many of us. And I really look forward to what we'll hear today. The person that is really instrumental in making all this possible is our Dean of the School of Public Policy, Robert Orr, and the faculty, but also Jane Hirschberg, who I've had the privilege of working for and with before, and we welcome her back to tell us a little bit about how this all came about. Jane.
Thank you. So that was the amazing David Crocker. He's a professor here in the School of Public Policy. And David and Jim Riker from Beyond the Classroom and I were scheming about this probably a year or so ago when we knew that the Nile project was going to be coming here. We knew that we wanted to do this very particular discussion. And they were the ones that made the suggestions for these fabulous people that are here that are going to be talking. And our moderator is Stacy Costco, who is actually an alumna of the School of Public Policy, and now she's part of the leadership team at Maryland's minor in International Development and Conflict Management, and she's going to be introducing the panelists. There's going to be an opportunity for you all to ask questions afterwards, and so hold your questions, and Stacy will give you the cue. Thank you, and thank you to the Nile Project.
Thank you, thank you. As you can see from the taste we had right at the beginning, the music is tremendous. I want to leave as much time for that as possible, so I'm going to just refer you back to your programs to read the full bios of all of the participants. But I will at least tell you who we have here on our panel. To my left, we have Dr. Sahar Khamis and Chloe Schwenke, also an alumna of the School of Public Policy. And we also have Maqlid Hadero, and correct me if I pronounce any of your names wrong. Maqlid Hadero, Dina El-Wadidi, and Kasiva Mutua, who are performer panelists and joining us from the Nile Project. I'm thrilled to have been asked to participate in this event, and I don't want to take up any more time than I need to with my own words, but I'll just quickly contextualize what the environment, I think, in which the Nile Project has arisen. As most of you know, the Nile is the world's longest river, and the Nile Basin is comprised of 11 countries in northern and eastern Africa. More than 450 people live in the countries that the Nile passes through, more than 450 million people. We'll go with the higher number. More than 450 million people live in the countries the Nile passes through. And by some estimates, at least 200 million of those people rely directly on the Nile as a source for water and food. Many of them also rely on it for their energy and their transportation. The river and its ecosystem, you won't be surprised to hear, are under a great deal of pressure. And consider this, though. In the next 25 years, they estimate that the population of this particular region is set to double. So you can imagine what those pressures may look like 25 years from now. The communities and the governments of the Nile Basin are going to need to rely on all of their creativity and all of their resources in order to start to meet those challenges. Women make up 25% of 52% of the region's population. Clearly, I'm not a data person. 52% of the region's population, and they play a vital role in the use and the management and the supply and the procurement of these resources. But the Nile countries, the Nile Basin countries, all 11 of them, are fiercely patriarchal, and women remain today marginalized in the basic decision-making about these resources and other matters in their households and in their communities. So the Nile Project invites us to consider what the Nile Basin may look like, at least in certain dimensions, if its women were fully empowered. And with that, I want to turn over to Maklit, who's going to tell us more about the Nile Project. You may need to turn your mic on. On, oh, great.
Oh, it's on. Hi, everybody. Hi. Thanks for being here with us today. So I'm the co-founder of the Nile Project. The Nile Project began on August 19th, 2011, so that is the birthday. It's been about 3.5 years now, and it began with music. The Nile Project is a musical initiative as well as thinking about ecology and cultural relationships. It's about the intersection of culture and ecology. So the project began when Mina Girgis, who is the other co-founder, and myself went to an Ethiopian music concert in Oakland, California, and we danced the night away, and afterwards we were talking about access to culture, and how access to culture is a kind of power. And in Oakland, California, and in many places in diaspora, the Nile Basin citizens who are in diaspora have access to each other. We can be each other's peers and neighbors and colleagues and friends, but on the Nile itself, there's quite a lot of barriers to getting to know each other in many, many ways, in many, many contexts, including cultural contexts. And what that means is that it's very easy then for people who are in other Nile Basin countries to become an other, to be otherized. And this is what happens when people are strangers to each other. And what we thought was, what if we brought the access that we have here in diaspora to the continent itself, and what would that look like, and wouldn't that be powerful? And I'm a musician and singer. Mina is an ethnomusicologist. So we said, what if we bring the music of the neighbors to the neighborhood? And that was the beginning. The beginning was about bringing musicians together to create music together, to learn from one another, and through that learning to then grow and to share that music with the world. After our research began very, very quickly, we realized that we were smack in the middle of a very intense conflict over how we were going to share the water of the Nile. And at the same time, this music that we wanted to make could be impactful, positively impactful, beyond just the music itself. At the same time, we stay true to our roots as a musical project, as a cultural initiative, where the power of knowing people in real ways, of true friendships and relationship that is more than something on a piece of paper, where it's an open heart as well as an open mind. This is what music can do, and this is why we work within that sphere in order to positively impact our region. So the project also has elements of education and of social entrepreneurship, and we work with university students in the Nile Basin as well. In terms of the project's attention to this question of women, women's empowerment and representation of women in the Nile Basin. When we were putting together the band and putting together what the ensemble would become, we were very, very intentional that this would be half women. Part of what we're doing when we make music together is showing an idea an idea of this is how we want to relate to each other on the Nile Basin. We are the living metaphor, we are the living example. And not just that, but there is a generation of incredibly powerful women musicians who are also leaders in their communities, who are responding to their social and cultural contexts. And this is the generation that we wanted to be included in the Nile Project because it's only going to grow. And there are so many people who are incredibly inspiring. And at the same time, I always feel that I have to add when we're traveling, particularly in the United States, that these questions of women's empowerment are not questions of East Africa, of the Nile Basin. These are questions that the whole world is dealing with. And as we are looking at how we're going to deal with the tensions and the leaps that we're going to make, that we're going to have to make as humans on this planet to handle the challenges of the 21st century, women have to be equal partners at the table everywhere in the world. So this is a worldwide conversation. This is not about just what's happening in the Nile Basin.
Thank you, Macleod. I think that's a particularly valuable reminder. And with that in mind, I am going to bring it now back to the Nile Basin countries and ask Sahar if you could please contextualize for us a bit some of what Macleod just shared and share with us some of the issues in particular facing the women of the Nile Basin.
Thank you so much, Stacey. It's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be with you today in this very interesting, very important event. And as you can tell, I put on blue because that's the Nile color. So it's my favorite color, but it's also the color of the Nile. So I felt that it would be in synchrony with the spirit of the event. And I want to thank everybody for their efforts in putting this event together and thank the musicians for the beautiful performance and everyone else who's involved in this good effort. Indeed, the women of the Nile do have unique challenges facing them, but they also have unique opportunities and they have unique qualities as well. It is no secret that women of the Nile, many of them live in the so-called underdeveloped or developing world, and therefore they do face multiple challenges on so many different levels. There is a very high rate of illiteracy in many of these countries, staggeringly high rate of illiteracy, and it increases particularly among women, and especially among women in areas that are more remote or rural areas in particular. There are also challenges pertaining to the lack of proper sanitation or health services. Many women suffer from either lack of services in the area of health or the availability or accessibility of these services as well. In addition, I call them also the invisible population. In many cases, their labor is invisible. It is vital, it is important, it is crucial. They go out in the fields, they help the men side by side, as peasants, as workers, as laborers, in addition to their domestic workload, which does not go away. They go back home in order to raise their families and raise the children and take care of everybody else. So they have multiple layers of responsibility. But this labor remains largely invisible, meaning it is usually not accounted for or officially documented in many places. It's not written down on the books as such that she has so many hours of work per day. Not to speak, of course, of the fact that it's unpaid labor, whether we're talking about her domestic labor or her labor outside of the household. In addition to that, there are also multiple layers of invisibility that these women suffer from, not just in the economic sphere, but also in the government planning sphere, also in the media sphere. In so many different ways, they remain invisible and they remain unknown to us. Their stories are not told, which is why it's important to have events like that and to increase awareness about these particular women and their needs and livelihood and challenges in order to be able to understand more about them and increase their visibility. And by doing so, we can help them to become more empowered and more enabled and to play a more active and constructive role while acknowledging the amount of time and effort and sacrifice that they actually put. But I also want to point out that the picture is not all that bleak because I think that they also have potential, they definitely have capacities, they definitely have a lot of power. Who said women are weak? I want to know. Women are really, really very, very strong. The amount of work and the amount of energy they have and the sacrifice, and they're the glue of the family, and they work in so many different spheres. And I think that all of that means that they're very powerful, they're very strong. We just have to reach out to them and make them realize that we also understand their challenges. We also reach out to them. We're also there for them. We're trying to increase their visibility. So I think they're very unique women with unique challenges, as I said, but also with that comes unique potentials and unique opportunities as well.
Thank you, thank you. I want to turn now to Chloe. You have extensive experience living and working in the area, especially South Sudan, but also to some extent Uganda and Sudan. Building on Sahara's comments, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the experiences of these countries over the past decade with respect to insecurity and conflict and repressive rule and the impacts of these dimensions on women's lives and just on the project of women's empowerment more broadly.
Thank you very much, Stacy, and thank you all for being here. I'm pleased to be back. This was my school, so it's still my school. It's nice to be here.
We're glad to blame you.
Thank you. I've been working in the Nile Basin since 1979, and going back and forth from that whole period, lived and was based there for 15 years. A lot of my work in Sudan, South Sudan, northern Uganda, the whole region pretty much. I guess in this particular context, the most important thing to point out is that much of that period that I just mentioned has been a period of intense conflict and displacement of people. The north of Uganda, of course, had the Lord's Resistance Army that's for 20 years wreaked havoc upon that region, and particularly women who were very vulnerable, and huge numbers displaced. The southern Sudanese, now its own country, they had a war that went from 1983 to 2005. A rough estimate, 2.5 million people killed. Sudan itself, while not directly involved in a conflict, is an extremely repressive country, and of course Darfur, which is not on the Nile, but is a real example of a place where a state uses rape as a regular weapon of war. It's policy. That's what they do. And so it goes on. These are really hard stories. What you don't hear about, though, is, I mean, you do hear about women as victims of violence in times of insecurity and war. Women are obviously very vulnerable to that. And of course, they're vulnerable in multiple ways, physically themselves as individuals, but their families too, their connections, their children, their whole society. They're the ones that stitch together these societies, and they watch it all unravel right before their eyes. And they're powerless to do much about that. But far be it from me to leave you with an impression that they are powerless individuals. Mm-hmm. Many of these women actually fight and have fought alongside the men. You look at the war in South Sudan. Women were right there, literally in the trenches. Look at the Arab Spring in Egypt. Women were absolutely at the center of that, taking tremendous risks. Unfortunately, at the end of the Arab Spring, at the end of the war in South Sudan, women are said, okay, well, you can go now. It's time for the men to take over. And that's exactly what's happened. In both cases, women were basically shown the door, despite their incredible sacrifices, both at the domestic side and on the field of battle, quite literally. I want to give you, though, I guess I don't want to be, it's so easy to be negative about this region because the harshness and real suffering there is almost beyond description. You see it, and if you go there, you see it in the eyes of the people. These are people that have really struggled. But these are people with their own wisdom and their own ability to bring something important to the development of this region, to the heart of this region. And I'll give you a really quick anecdote, and that's when I was working in northern Uganda. And the people in the northern Karamoja there have this tradition, and it's gone back forever, that before a young man can marry a young woman, he has to go steal cattle from the other tribe to prove his manhood. It just has to be done. And in the old days, it wasn't a big deal. You would have spears. You'd go throw a couple spears at the other guys. You'd take a cow or two. 3 weeks later, they'd come and do the same back to you. Everybody got married. Very few people got hurt. Nowadays, it's AK-47s. And they're out there literally killing many, many people. And the ones who are egging them on, saying, you're not marrying me, are the women. So don't think of women as these, holier-than-thou, stand-aside peacemakers in all instances. They can be right in the middle of the narrative that is of the region, that builds this culture that often leads to very unpleasant outcomes, to put it mildly. What USA did in that region when I was working there is to say, women have to be part of this solution. And the men looked at them and said, well, we don't do that here. You're being insensitive to our culture. Men decide these things. And USAID, and I'm glad to say I was part of it, we pushed back. we said that, well, that's not our values. And we're funding this project, damn it. We want to have this conversation on mutually respectful terms. And we know women activists right here in northern Uganda that are very eager to be part of the solution. So what we finally ended up doing was having a forum for the men and a forum for the women. And they operated literally side by side. And there were messengers that ran back and forth. And it worked so well because, first of all, the men had no idea that women could even do this. They had no idea that women could think through these kinds of situations in a deliberative way and come up with really cogent, practical, resourceful solutions. And equally sexist on the women's part, the women didn't know that men could get serious about issues as well. They could actually sit down and talk it through. And every time the messenger came from one little encampment to the other, they were stunned that the other side had done this. I mean, they never got to a place where they wanted to meet together. And that's okay. That's an expression of where the culture's at. But there are avenues, if we think a little laterally, of getting everyone, men and women. And this is not just a women's issue. This is everyone's issue. Peace is everyone's issue. But that means everyone has to be involved. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you. And I appreciate your ability, Claudia, to make us all smile and laugh a bit even while talking about some very difficult issues. Thanks. I want to go now to Kasiva. I want to give you a chance to talk a bit about your experience as a performer. Your personal experience of being a woman musician in Kenya, a little bit about how music is viewed as a profession for women in your community and what it's meant for you personally and for the relationships that you have to choose to perform publicly.
All right, thank you very much. Music by itself is not taken seriously as a career or as a choice of life per se in Kenya in general, in both male and female. And I don't know why. I was drilled to become a journalist, but I'm playing drums for a living, and my family thinks I'm crazy. And generally, it's a little bit difficult for women to make any sense or to be deemed as important in music in Kenya. And this is because traditionally, women were not allowed to play many of the instruments that exist in tribal communities. And I mean, I'll speak about the drum because that's my major. And drums in Kenya are viewed as very sacred instruments, and this is because they were used in very religious religious ceremonies and rites of passage and spiritual rituals per se. And all these events were carried out by men, and the women would stay back home, or they would do the after work of cooking and celebrating afterwards when everything was over. And no woman would even be allowed to touch a drum, let alone come near it. And I mean, so you can imagine how they view me, because I mean, I've embraced the drum really much. I've been playing professionally for 10 years now, but I started playing when I was 6 years. And I mean, I was born in the rural area, in the village, and my grandmother raised me until I was 6. And she'd tell me these stories and at night, and she'd teach me how to listen to natural sounds, to cricket sounds, to the river flowing, to the chirping of birds. And I grew to have a very keen ear. And as I grew up, I sort of managed to organize these different sounds into rhythm, into time signatures, which I didn't realize they were time signatures then. But I was able to play beats and come up with beats, crazy beats, some which I think, if I remember, I'd be like a maestro right now. But yeah, I mean, so I grew up hitting things, surfaces, tables, chairs, glasses. And I mean, until now, I still believe everybody can be a percussionist if they want, because even sneezing is percussion. That laugh right there is percussion. And that giggle too. But yeah, so I grew up hitting things, and I mean, everybody that I was living with wasn't keen enough to see what was going on, because, I mean, you might just think it's something childish to do, to just, you know, kick things, play with a bottle, but to me it meant something. And growing up and participating in festivals in school sort of exposed me to music. But in school, I mean, it's just an extracurricular activity. And I mean, in Kenya, in primary school, which takes 8 years, I mean, nobody takes that very seriously. I mean, everybody can go sing, dance a little, clap, and that's it. When I went to secondary school, that is high school, I think that is when it broke up, and I was literally going crazy from drums. And I went to all these festivals, and I was performing pretty well. But I remember this one instance. I went to sign up my name for a competition. So we have these annual music festivals in Kenya that all schools can participate in, all schools and colleges and universities. And I'm standing in queue, waiting to sign up my name for the drum ensemble and drum solo pieces. And this boy comes over and says, "Hi, how are you?" "I'm good." "Are you lost?" I'm like, "No, isn't this the drum solo, drum ensemble queue?" Like, "Yeah, I think you're lost. The French solo pieces are right there." And I'm like, no, this is where I want to be. And he turns and tells his friends, "Look at this skirt." And I'm referred to as a skirt because I don't know if, well, I proved myself to him in like an hour and told him, "Yeah, see, I was actually right. I'm not crazy." And this went on, and in my final year of school, I was crowned the best percussionist in the country. And I mean, that meant a lot to me. That was sort of like a message telling me that, you know, struggle for 4 years, and maybe the past 8 years when you've been a kid is not all in vain. And I go to university and study journalism, and I'm still playing secretly. And all of this time, my mom doesn't know what I do. And I supplement my pocket money by playing small gigs in restaurants in Jinja, because I studied in Uganda. And I finished school, and I'm not happy doing journalism. So I go to my mom, give her my school papers, tell her, I'm done doing journalism. I passed very well, you can see. I'm out. I've gone to drum. She's like, "What?" Like, yeah, I mean, this is what makes me happy. This is what I live for. I feel imprisoned when I'm doing journalism, and I mean, you should come see me play and see what I mean. And she goes crazy, because this is not something she can face her friends and tell her, "My daughter is a drummer." That's embarrassing. That's absolutely embarrassing. But I've spent almost 5 to 6 years of my life trying to prove who I am in the music industry in Kenya, because a woman holding an instrument is a joke, and you have to work extremely hard to show that you are actually skilled in this instrument. I'll give you an example. There's a woman from Asia, I'm not sure if it's China, Japan, or Korea. She's called Anyango. They named her Anyango. I'm not sure of her real name, I just know she's called Anyango, is a Kenyan name. And she's the first woman to ever attempt to play an instrument called nyatiti in Kenya. And it took a person from outside Kenya to come hold that instrument and play it really skillfully for other women to actually dare and touch this instrument. And now a couple of women are playing this instrument. And this is because So you grow up and you go to school, but this part of you is very traditional, and it still sticks there that it is wrong to touch this instrument. And I mean, I've had to argue and have long talks with traditional elders trying to explain why I play the drum, and it ended up really badly, and I've been sort of expelled from my community because of doing what I do. But I don't regret it because, I mean, I don't use the drum to evoke spirits. I don't use the drum for religious matters. I use the drum for happiness and entertainment. And if that's what I do, I don't think that's wrong. And I mean, I've been trying to explain this to people, but, well, it's really hard. But yeah, I mean, last year I participated in the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in DC. And I was really happy to actually see that a part of Kenya is changing its mindset on women in music. I mean, there are tons of great percussionists back home, but being on that stage with, in the women's segment of the festival, got me thinking why they chose me to be there, then why? And that shows that a lot is changing. And this sort of mindset of women in music is a joke is sort of changing. And this is very hopeful. And I mean, I'm here to stay. I'll drum to death.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. In addition to music and certain musical instruments being forbidden for women to play or participate in, there are many of the Nile Basin countries in which storytelling is something that is an act that's not, the women are not welcome to participate in. But I want to invite Dina to talk a bit about your role as a particular type of storyteller. What is Surat, and can you tell us a bit about your choice to sing Surat? And I will say at the end, we will hear a Surat song by Dina.
Okay. Sira is, first let me tell you about my music background in the beginning. So I studied in Cairo University, Oriental language, Turkish and Persian language. And then during my studying, I started to discover my other side. And I wanted to discover like the music side of mine. So it started from the theater while I was studying. I went to a group, it called the Warsha Group, which was working about the traditional Egyptian folklore music and work about the artists, how they improve their skills to act and to dance and to tell stories and to sing and this stuff. So it was a very beginning and a huge society just opened from my eyes for me. I was starting from acting, and in the morning I was working as a tour guide. So it was like a little confused life in the beginning. So so in the Warsha Group I stayed 3 years, and this I can consider it. This is my truly my music background, because I didn't get the chance to study music. So that was the beginning of my start. And there I met a big master, and he's from Upper Egypt. His name Sayyid Al-Daw. He's a big master who is teaching you how to sing the traditional stuff and the real, like sheikh, like who's saying Quran, but he's saying the kind of this singing in a different way, not the Quran. So I met that man, and he's really a big mentor for me, and he started to teach me how to sing this kind of songs. So usually this kind of songs, like you mentioned about the Sira song, it's mainly talk about the life, about the Islam when it came to the Arab area, and the Arab life and the wars between the Arab and the lifestyle they were living there. And in Upper Egypt, this kind of song is really, really very important and very rich. They consider it as a Quran. They use it really in a very important way. Even in wedding, even in when people die, even when nostalgia stuff, anywhere. So he started to teach me stories about that. So I get very interesting in this kind of stuff. And I wanted to ask him, like, wow, should I work on it? Because he's very traditional with the way to teach, like the traditional instrumental and the traditional singing. So I was like learning from him the basic way to teach this kind of stuff. But after I separated from the Warsha group in 2011, when the revolution came to Egypt, I started to think about my own project, to do my own stuff. So I think about, okay, I want to do my original songs, but also I want to do a cover song like this kind of stuff, because it's very rich. And usually it's not familiar to any woman to sing it about that, because it's a start usually to say a good stuff about Prophet Muhammad in the beginning, and then to tell the story about when the Islam came and the inspiration the Islam came to this area, and the war, and start to get to the story. And there are many heroes in that. So mainly the Sira talk about that, and I think I was thinking to sing this kind of song because I feel like we have a very rich folklore Egyptian stuff, and why not I can rearrange it to my generation, because I can do something fixed with my mind and my character in the music. So that's why I put it in my first album, and the people now is really get interesting to know the stories and asking me about, but now it's no one sing this kind of songs at all in Cairo, in the modern Cairo now. I mean, so that was a way to inspire me to sing this.
Thank you. Thank you. Sticking a little bit with the theme of storytelling, in this building and in a lot of buildings on campus, we spend a lot of time staring into numbers. We spend a lot of time working with data, trying to get it to give us the answers, and sometimes it does, often without a story, or without a complete story maybe, or a story with nuance. And so I want to ask Sahar, you're an ethnographer, and you spent quite a bit of time working with Egyptian rural women. Can you speak to the power of storytelling as a tool, as a research methodology for helping us to understand the issues confronting women, or anyone else for that matter, please?
Absolutely, that's a very important point, and thank you for bringing it up, Stacy. I think that ethnography is a very powerful tool to really, as I said earlier, make the invisible more visible. And also at the same time, listen to these women in their own voice. Basically, we call it giving voice to the voiceless. In other words, if many of these women are so wonderful, hardworking, great women, the glue of the family, the hardworking peasants and laborers and mothers and taking care of the family and doing all of this great work in many different spheres, but we don't know who they are. We don't come close enough to really kind of understand their own lives in their own words, from their own lens. Then we are missing a lot. I know the room must have some quantitative researchers, and I value numbers, I respect numbers, and I grew up in a positivistic orientation in Egypt. You know, values, assigned to statistics and numbers are very high. But I really fell in love with ethnography when I was doing my PhD at the University of Manchester, and I got introduced to the area of ethnography and cultural studies, and I found my passion there. Because for the very first time, I was able to write a story using the word I, and write I in my own research. I told my supervisor, you mean I can say, I went to the village and I interviewed the women? She said, yes, absolutely. I was like, sure? Yeah, sure. Just write it in your own words, it's you. So I was like, wow, that is so different from saying the researcher collected the data, the researcher found X, Y, Z, as if the researcher is another entity coming out, you know, from outer space or from Mars. It's me, right, who was there and attended, you know, all of these events and talked to all of these women and went to the village and sat with them on the floor, on the ground, helped in baking the bread, helped to burn the bread sometimes. You know, I did all of these things. So I was part and parcel of the research experience, what we call participant observation. And participant observation means that the researcher is not living in an ivory tower anymore. He or she is not distant, is not alien from those that he or she is researching. Rather, they become part and parcel of this experience. And with that comes a lot of nuance and a lot of depth. That's why we say that ethnography is the art of thick description. You give a very thick and a very rich description of the local culture and the local community that you are studying and interacting with on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis. And let me just tell you, I learned a lot from these women, from their own livelihood, from their own identity, from their own lifestyle, from their own experiences. It was an amazing experience. And I did my PhD at one of the Egyptian rural villages, so I am a native of Egypt, just like Dina, two fellow Egyptians on the panel. So, yeah. So, I mean, I did my research in a rural village in Egypt. And when I talked to these Egyptian rural women about things they were watching on TV, like family planning, health awareness, and literacy campaigns, it was very clear there is a big gap between those who are the agenda setters, the policy setters, those who set the agenda or dictate the policy from their ivory tower in Cairo, and these Egyptian rural women as they live their own lives and realities on a day-to-day, in and out basis. Just to give you one brief example, they would say to me something like, just because we cannot read and write, just because we did not go to school, does not mean that we are stupid women. Doesn't mean that we are ignorant women. We are very wise people. All of these ads on TV, they show us because we are not literate, because we did not go to school, as if we are idiots. We are not idiots. We are very smart women. And they would tell me something like, my grandmother and my mother was able to raise 8 or 10 successful children and send them all to university. By the way, my own grandmother also was not very educated, but she was able to raise 8 successful children who are all university graduates and all very successful and very decent people, right? I struggle with 2. So think about it. So these are very, very wonderful, hardworking, powerful, strong, lovely people. But when you depict them in the media or through just the eyes of governmental research or governmental agencies, as if these people need to be helped, we just need to go there and educate them, we need to build more schools. Ask them first, what are your needs? What is your story? What are your own values? What do you want? It is very important to see things from their eyes, not just from our eyes. And this is where the value of qualitative research and the value of ethnography comes in. It comes in this ability to reveal the lives of these people in a very intimate, very close-up, very rich, and very deep manner that cannot be achieved by positivistic or quantitative research or numbers alone. It is really giving a chance for them to tell their stories in their own voice and gives voice to the voiceless.
Thank you for that, Sahar, and also for raising the point about the gap between the lived experiences of women and others and the agenda setters. And to that, I actually want to bring Chloe back in. Certainly these women, through their stories, through their music, are making significant strides in rewriting the narrative of the Nile Basin. But how can we challenge the agenda setters, and by here I really mean the men of the region, to do their share in this revision, to support and value the women in their communities?
Well, the answer is it's not easy. The biggest challenge, of course, is we already heard that mindsets are changing. Well, mindsets need to change a lot. And one of the very best examples of that is when men get to see women in a very effective role. I just mentioned to you before the situation in the Karamoja where the women were actually shown to be thinking. Lo and behold. This is the sort of thing that has to happen. There's been such a strong cultural tradition for millennia of women performing specific roles, end of story. So when you get a drummer that comes up and does something different, people sit up and they take notice and they say, wow, this is possible. This is actually possible. So we have to change the paradigm. We have to shake some people up. We have to be a lot provocative. And to do that means a couple of things. Most importantly, it means to be engaged. And what I think is the most heartening experience that I've seen, certainly in my work in South Sudan, is when I started there wasn't a single civil society organization. There's over 72 now in South Sudan. And women play a very huge role, and I would in many cases say the preponderant role in civil society throughout the Nile Basin. This is a space where women can be effective and are effective and get things done. And they're getting very sophisticated about this. Out of these 72, all but 10 have offices. They have emails. I mean, this is South Sudan. I mean, this is unbelievable in the space of such a short time to see this happen. Similarly in Uganda, similarly in many of these other countries, civil society is the backbone of change. And that's the place where women get to be effective, get to show leadership, get to rewrite the scripts, and they do it alongside men. And it changes everything. It's a whole new paradigm where men and women can really literally work together on development. The caution, though, to all of this is civil society can do very little of anything when there's fighting going on. Any of you who have studied human rights, and hopefully all of you have studied human rights, know that it starts with safety and security. Without that, there's no conversation, much less any other human rights. And this is a region where people just don't stop fighting. We now, after the peace settlement that ended the 20-some years in South Sudan, that peace settlement in 2005, now Salva Kiir and Riek Machar are back at it again and have been for the last 4 years. You know, who knows what that's about? Nobody's really able to unravel the reason for that fighting. A lot of it's ethnic, a lot of it's just two men with very big egos. Women are trying to do what they can. Women are involved in the peace negotiations. They've forced their way into the peace negotiations that are taking place in Ethiopia. But the 7 last agreements have fallen, and the current peace agreement is already unraveling. There's no real will amongst these men to change. The power, the quest, the thirst for power is just so overwhelming. So that has to change. And women are doing all that they can right now to be part of that change. But they can't do it until some men show some leadership too. And that's what's not happening yet. We really need to call men into this to say it's your time now. And we need to do it here as well. Whenever you talk about gender in this country, oh, that's women. We're starting to see, and we're starting to use the expression gender equality, and there's sometimes gender equity. That's an invitation. It's an invitation to say we've got enough rooms full of empowered women all over the world talking to each other. They need to talk and engage in a mutually respectful way with the men. Gender is for everybody. Everybody has gender. And that's something that's lost on a lot of people. So there's lots of threads here that's coming together. The chance to rewrite scripts, the chance to reinvent a place where women can be active, in this case civil society, a chance to take part in formal peace negotiations, chance upon chance upon chance upon chance. For God's sakes, men, stop fighting. Just for a little while, so that we can actually see some development, because everybody wants that to happen.
Hear, hear. Just a couple more questions to wrap up, and then we'll throw it out to the audience for some Q&A. Sahar, the Arab Spring movements have brought some really significant and positive examples of women's activism, their sacrifice, their heroism. But looking ahead, now that we're 4 years out from the eruption of the Arab Spring, looking ahead, can you discuss what the opportunities and limitations and challenges are related to women's status and role in society?
Absolutely. I mean, the Arab Spring was a very important historic moment. Some people think like, oh, women, like, you know, did not have a role before. No, they did have a role before. It is just that I think the combination of activism with the communication revolution and the use of social media and new media, citizen journalism, civic engagement, when you put all of these things together in the mix, it amplifies these different voices. In other words, there were attempts in these countries, the Arab Spring countries, before 2011, to try to shake some of these dictatorial regimes, and women were part and parcel of some of these activist movements and attempts to shake some of these regimes in power. It is just we did not really pay attention to them, or we did not know about them sufficiently. What happened in 2011, the turning point was that this activism was really becoming more visible because of the communication revolution, the ability to use social media, amplified these voices of protest and activism. And indeed, women were very much at the forefront of these movements. They did not just play traditional roles or what we call the caring roles of just being nurses or caring for men or supporting men in their struggle. No, they were very much at the forefront of the lines of resistance, putting their own lives at risk. Some of them got killed. They became martyrs because they believed in their own values, and they were really trying to fight for democracy and for freedom in their own nations. Some of them got harassed, some of them became refugees, some of them became prisoners, some of them were tortured in prison, and some of them were forced to exile. And I do know many of these activists personally, and I was able to interview them for my own research purposes. So these stories are real, and these women are heroines. They really are iconic figures. And they're not just setting iconic examples or role models for other women. They're also setting examples and becoming role models for men as well. Let me just mention the example of, just among many, the example of the young lady who stood up in the heart of Manama, the capital of Bahrain, and she was able to recite this poem against the king, with something that nobody else dared to do, and she was imprisoned for that. A young man came up and said, oh my God, I look at this 20-year-old young lady having so much courage to stand up in the middle of the square and to recite this poem and to face, the dictator, face the king, something that no man had dared to do before. So I mean, they really kind of broke a lot of what we call the gender stereotypes. They shattered many of the myths about women's weakness and vulnerability and their inability to take part in the public sphere, and they broke and dispelled many of these gender stereotypes, setting new models and new examples, and becoming role models and leaders, not just for other women, but also for men in their own countries and nations. And of course, the selection of Tawakkul Karman, who was known as the mother of the revolution in Yemen. She's a journalist and an activist, and she was one of the leaders and pioneers in the movement in Yemen. Her selection as a winner, the first Arab woman to be selected for the Nobel Prize, was a nod for the Arab Spring movements in general, but also a nod for the role of women in the Arab Spring movements in particular. Having said all of that, however, there is this, bitter side of the story. As Chloe said before, unfortunately, in many cases, once the actual protest or demonstration or revolution is over, women are shown to the door, or it's like, thank you, ladies, you've done your part, now it's time for you to go back to the kitchen. Go and do your nails or something like that. It's like, no, we were there fighting, we paid the price for our too. We were side by side with men, we were in the front lines of resistance, we faced imprisonment, we faced death. It's our right to be part and parcel of the making of the future of our own countries and our own nations. We have to be visible and present in the public sphere. But there are still, unfortunately, so many limitations and so many challenges in this regard. In some countries, there is still, of course, unfortunately, a big backlash in terms of the amount of freedom and democracy allowed in some of these nations. Some of them have taken a detour or derailed from the democratic process altogether, which is really heartbreaking, because 4 years after the eruption of the Arab Spring, I'm not as upbeat and optimistic as I was before in terms of the future of these countries and their path to democracy. And whenever you have violations of human rights, whenever you have dictatorship, whenever you have pumps on the road to democracy, everybody suffers, men and women alike. But women, I think, have a double struggle. It's the struggle for the political freedom and democracy side by side with men, in addition to their own gender struggle to assert their role in society and to claim their own role in the political, economic, and social sphere. So there are definitely so many limitations and so many challenges ahead of these women, and we cannot, underestimate them. But I still have a lot of faith, a lot of belief, and a lot of trust in these women and in their ability to make a difference, because they have known the road to freedom, and I think they will continue to pursue it.
I had planned a final question to ask to Chloe, what is the hope for the future? But I actually think both of you have already spoken to that beautifully. I also want to make sure we have time for our three members of the Nile Project to respond to questions, as well as Sahar and Chloe. So let me turn it over to the audience in the time that remains, and after the questions are over, we'll have one final musical number to round the whole thing out. Please do wait till the microphone comes around to you. We're recording, so we want to be sure to get your question.
Hi, so first I want to thank the professors and also the Nile Project for coming to this country. It was a real privilege to get to see all of you perform last night. And I have a question in regards to politics and the overall goals of the Nile Project. So as we all know, the wake of the Arab Spring and also South Sudan becoming independent, there's a lot of political turmoil, you could call it. Is one of the goals of the Nile Project to reach the ears of presidents of the those countries along the Nile and political leaders, or is it more to reach people at the grassroots level? Do you think that political leaders are willing, and also could they play a role in environmental preservation and also the rights of women, or do you think that really has to come from the grassroots level?
That was like 7 questions. It's cool. So for us, we do work with the governments of the Nile Basin because you can't do work in East Africa without having a relationship with the governments. But what we feel is that there are established ways for the political process to move forward, and there are far less established ways for people-to-people communication and dialogue to happen. So the place that we choose to work is much more at the level of a grassroots. And we have toured in the Nile Basin, and our main stakeholders are in the Nile Basin as well. You know, for us, music is something that is very foundational. But there are other aspects of what the project does. We do work with university students in the Nile Basin, particularly looking at the kind of, so when you think about water and water as a quantity issue, like who gets how much water, there's often other issues that are really underneath that. So it's not just about amount of water, it's what do you use the water for. And a lot of that is agriculture, as well as issues like energy and transportation and all of these things. So we have a program called the Nile Prize, which we'll be launching next year. And what that does is looks at one of these issues that is underneath the question of how much water. And so we'll be starting off with agricultural and food sustainability as our first year's focus. And what will happen is that students in the Nile Basin, university students, will be able to work together to create projects that address those issues, food sustainability starting out. And so we invite students from any disciplines, whether they're studying journalism, there's a way for them to be involved in that, whether they're studying and you know, they could be studying photography, they could be artists, they could be hydrologists, they could be engineers. But looking at all of these different ways that students from multiple Nile Basin countries can work together to create projects that actually address these other issues. And then the Nile Prize will go to one of these projects. Additionally, there's fellowships, Nile fellowships that will be launched next year as well, looking at these issues. So we are not a political project in the sense that we specifically address the political process. But what we look at is ways of relating people to each other to look at solutions that consider the Nile as a whole system. Because when you look at that big picture angle, this is something that actually is quite new, looking at the entire ecosystem. Many people, I mean, sometimes we go to different universities around this country and people are like, oh, the Nile is 11 countries, and they don't understand that, but actually many people in the Nile Basin also can't name the 11 countries that share the river. So when you talk about lack of access, there's also a lot of knowledge that can be filled in. So we're not a political project, but we are one that works at multiple layers to address these issues.
In the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Lily. I am a research fellow based in DC. I came from the National Endowment for Democracy program. I'm from Ethiopia, and actually my family is from the region where Nile is. So when I say my family, they're like my aunts, my cousins. So whenever I go to visit them, I see them swimming in the river, washing clothes there, bathing there. So I know what kind of connections these people have with the Nile. But at the same time, they're the most marginalized people. They're the most poorest from the whole East Africa. Like those are the ones who are in the very rural region. So one thing that touched me when Dr. Asara was speaking is no one really talks to the people there. No one really communicates what they need. These people are, the women in those regions are the ones that they get up early in the morning, they fetch water, they cook, they take lunch to their husbands to the farm, they come back, they watch after the kids, they clean up the house, they stay late, past midnight, doing the household work, and they get up early in the morning. They're like the backbone of even the family. They're the backbone of every economy there. So I want to know, whenever these projects, like the Nile project you guys have, or other different Nile initiative, I really want to know how they really get to those people. It's nice that you guys communicate with leaders or university guys, but those are like in town. Those are not the people who are actually with Nile and living the life that is very poor. So I really want to know how any kind of project really gets to them. I want to know how these women who live in the area understands what these projects are. And one other thing I really want to mention is there is this documentary I watched. It's called Mystery of the Nile. I don't know how many people watched it here. I really love that documentary. It's about these filmmakers who started from Ethiopia. They followed the Nile up to Egypt until it enters the Mediterranean. And through that line, they stop by to each country in Sudan, Egypt, Ethiopia, and they communicate with the people. They shop, they buy food, and then they continue. And in the beginning of the movie, the lady saying goodbye to the rural village, one of the ladies, she gives her a necklace. And then by the end of the movie, she gives that necklace to an Egyptian girl. So that showed me how we are all connected through the Nile. And I really want us to be able to work for the women who live there together. So I want to know that. Thank you.
Who would like to take that? I could say something. You know, one of the things to keep in mind in most of these countries is that officially women are equal. The constitutions of these countries recognize gender equality and the laws look wonderful. But the people that you're talking about who are on the banks of the Nile don't get anywhere near the reality of those laws. They're stuck with traditional cultural norms of justice. I mean, in many countries like South Sudan, the rule of law is completely gone. It's just dysfunctional. But other countries, what you do to get people like the ones you're talking about involved is you bring those laws to them. And there's a really good example in the north of Uganda where they literally made mobile courts. And they would go and set up legal clinics, and they would have courts that were brought right into the rural areas. And they would have special days of the week that were only for women and for family law issues. Because women would not go to those courts if men would see them go to those courts, particularly around issues of divorce, as you can imagine, or child custody issues or things like that. So in countries where women are basically considered to be property, where they're not officially, well, they are officially, but they're not practically allowed to own land. Land, of course, is such an essential part of life. Where they're not allowed to keep the earnings that they've gotten from their work in terms of agriculture. They may sell some products, although a lot of it's sustainability. But the hard work that they do, the money isn't theirs to control at all. So by bringing lawyers and judges and others to them in the rural areas on a somewhat regular basis, women have access to rule of law. I mean, this is early days. This isn't happening anywhere near at the scale it needs to happen. But it's revolutionary. It really is.
And can I just add one thing? That's why it's very important to adopt culturally sensitive approaches and policies. That's very, very important. You know, we cannot just have things on paper, because on paper things look great. You know, on paper every child, male or female, should go to school. Is this the case? Absolutely not. In many cases, especially rural areas, women are either marginalized, there's a lot of patriarchal culture, there are local cultures and traditions that really restrain women and constrain them on so many different spheres. They're pushed to the side, and some people, if they have a choice to send a boy or a girl to school, it's the boy who gets sent to school and not the girl. So unless we really, as we say in ethnography, you know, make our feet dirty, Go there to the village and talk to the people and sit on the floor and help them in their daily chores and listen to their stories and see things from their own perspective, not from our perspective. As the young lady here was saying, academics and policymakers and everybody else, we cannot be in an ivory tower. We have to go there, make our feet dirty, talk to the people, listen to their stories from their own perspective, not from our perspective. Unless we develop this culturally sensitive approach, we're going to be missing out a lot, and we will not be able to reach these people's lives and to really reach these women and affect their lives.
Thank you very much. I had hoped to have a lot more time for questions, but then we wouldn't have a lot more time for music and time for discussion. Oh, we have an embarrassment of riches. I think at this point I would like to go to another musical number, though I know that there were probably a lot of good questions in the audience. Let me thank all of you for sharing your insights, both personal and professional. As I'm listening to all of you speak, it occurs to me that here in this academic environment where we're often admonished, as you mentioned, to be objective in our research, to keep the eye out of it. But increasingly, I wonder how much that's really a luxury of the powerful. The personal is political, and whether we're working at the grassroots level, whether we're working with politicians, whether we're working with USAID, I think it's important to keep that in mind and how that relates to many of the insights we've heard here today. So let me just wrap up by offering some thanks, and then we'll go to the music. I of course, want to thank Drs. Chloe Schwenke and Sahar Hamid for being here today, and also our performer panelists, Maklita Darrow, Dinel Wadidi, and Kasiva Mutua, right? Mutua. I want to thank the Clarice Smith Performing Arts Center, the Maryland School of Public Policy for being the chief organizers. Also, Beyond the Classroom and the Minor for International Development and Conflict Management have put little pieces towards making this happen. I'm grateful for that. But most importantly, I really want to thank the performers and the musicians from the Nile Project for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I just want to present my Egyptian friend and the great oud player. He's one of the members of the Nile Project. He's going to participate with us in the last song.
Another Egyptian.
So the next song that I'm going to present now, it's a sira, the ones that I just tell you the story about. So it's only a part of.
Yeah, we're recording. Mike. We know you've got the voice, but.
قد